I'm Sean Hall, Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. Our mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. You can find out everything there is to know about the VBC on our website, www.veteransbreakfastclub.org. Welcome to the VBC's 9th episode of Lioness, the Origin Story. This is a special podcast dedicated to telling the history of Lioness vets from their point of view. Over the course of this series, we'll cover everything from Team Lioness to female engagement teams and the cultural support teams. Our goal is to shed light on this unexplored history. Joining me again is filmmaker and writer Daria Summers. In 2008, Daria Summers, along with her filmmaking colleague Meg McLagan, released Lioness, a documentary that revealed the history of a group of women support soldiers who went to Iraq in 2003 as mechanics, clerks, and engineers, but ended up serving as the original Lioness soldiers. Although the Lioness's mission was to defuse tensions with Iraqi women and children, they fought in some of the bloodiest battles of the Iraq War. I'm going to hand it off here to Daria, who's going to introduce today's special guest, a Marine Corps veteran. Very excited for the conversation today. Take it away, Daria.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for episode 9. I'm both extremely honored and very excited to introduce our guest today. Her accomplishments as a Marine and her work as a veteran are simply extraordinary. Retired Sergeant Major Raquel Painter joined the Marine Corps at 17, and when she retired after nearly 27 years of service, she was one of only 23 Marines to ever earn the rank of Sergeant Major. During her career, she supported humanitarian efforts that following the 1995 Oklahoma bombing, and also in Sri Lanka after the 2004 tsunami. In March of 2007, she deployed to Iraq with Combat Logistics Battalion 8, and in July of 2009, she deployed to Afghanistan with Combat Logistics Battalion 6, where she was responsible for Marines and sailors at 5 different forward operating bases. During that deployment, she also served as the Brigade headquarters group FET leader, overseeing a group of 20 female engagement team members, and completed 11 patrol missions. In 2010, she was promoted to Sergeant Major and received her last assignment as Sergeant Major of the Wounded Warrior Battalion East. Upon her retirement from the Marine Corps in 2016, her interest in community and nonprofit work led to her role as the Hope for the Warriors Community Development Manager. 8 years later, she serves as president of the United Way of Onslow County, North Carolina. In 2021, Raquel, who is part Sioux and Winnebago, inaugurated an annual powwow to honor Indigenous Americans who have served. The impact of this work is even more amazing when you realize that since World War II, a greater percentage of Native Americans have served in the armed forces than any other ethnic group, and that in North Carolina, you have the highest populations of Native Americans east of the Mississippi. I could go on, but then we wouldn't have time for the interview. So I'll just add that in 2021, Raquel was named North Carolina's 2021 Combat Female Veteran of the Year. Welcome, Raquel. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I thought we could start. I like to do sort of an overall through line kind of each veteran, their service and their experience. So can we start with you just deciding as a young girl I think you said you grew up in Iowa?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so I grew up in Iowa, Sioux City, Iowa, which is right on the border of Nebraska and South Dakota and Iowa, where we all merged there. And it was in 2nd grade when I made the decision I wanted to be a Marine. Everybody was like, 2nd grade? Oh my gosh, that's young. Well, we had career day and my classmate's father was a Marine. And when he walked in, he had his dress blues on, the whole class was quiet. And no one said anything through his whole walk in the room, his talk, and his walk out. And this was 2nd graders. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want that. I want this when I walk in a room and people are like focused on you and really listening to what you're saying. So from that point on, I watched some Marine movies, read books. And, when you're in 2nd grade, it's really cute. But then when I got to high school and it was time for me to enlist, my father was like, No way. No way. I was 17 and I needed both my parents' permission. And the recruiter came to the house on the third time and said he wasn't coming back. This was it. So my mom, I remember this distinctly, called my dad in the kitchen. They had some words and he came out and signed it. And the rest is history. Then I spent 26 and a half years in the Marine Corps. Loved every minute of it, raised my family in the Marine Corps. So a lot of great memories.
So you said you were one of seven girls?
Yes, yes. So I got
Wow.
sisters, six sisters, and I'm the second to the youngest. Actually, I was supposed to be the youngest, and 5 years later, my dad tried again, and I had my baby sister.
And are you the only one of your sisters to serve?
Yes, the only one. I'm the only one to serve. And I think that one was enough for my dad.
Well, God bless him.
Yeah, especially the Marines. He was like, "Does it got to be the Marines?"
Well, no, I mean, I feel for him. Especially at that time, it
Mhm.
probably was unexpected or at least not what he expected.
Oh yes, yes, not what he expected. Yeah. So that was in 89. I mean, when I think of, I came in 89 and I retired in 2016, the difference and the changes that were made in the Marine Corps were just unbelievable. When I came in, there was only certain jobs open to us, obviously, admin, legal, supply, motor T. And then when I retired, all the fields were opening up to females.
Yeah, by the time you had retired, I
Mhm,
mean, in 2013, they rescinded the combat exclusion policy, which, was
mhm.
sort of not, on some level operating in name only at that point, but
Yeah.
but it was just the beginning of well, okay, the system is starting to change.
Yeah. And I think a big milestone just occurred this year for the Marine Corps is they closed down 4th Battalion, 4th Recruit Training Battalion, which was the only battalion that trained females. So that officially deactivated.
Oh, so now I had not heard that, but that would be so important
Mhm.
because now you're mainstreamed. There's
Yes.
there's no marginalized section for you.
No, no. So
Yeah.
they're training, they've been training females with the male recruits, for a few years, but they officially deactivated 4th Battalion. So now it's all integrated training.
So I got a sense from reading about you that part of what appealed to you or what you discovered in the Marines was the idea of service
Hmm.
a couple of other I mean most of them, but two veterans in particular really one who was a cultural support team member and the last female engagement team member I had on, both were motivated in the same way by service. But I was struck by, so your two of your first I guess deployments, as you would call them, one was to in the aftermath of the Oklahoma City bombing for humanitarian service, and
Hmm.
then the other one was in the aftermath in Sri Lanka in the aftermath of the tsunami. And so just before we get to the other stuff, I just felt those are really unusual, very compelling, and I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about them.
Yeah. So with the Alpha Mirror building bombing, I was actually stationed at the Oklahoma City MEPS at that time. So the MEPS is the Military Entrance Processing Station. And at the time, we just moved maybe a mile away from the federal building at that time. So we were closer to the airport. But when that bomb went off, us being located where we were, it actually felt like a plane hit that building. It actually felt like a plane hit our building. That's how much of that blast that we felt where we were at. Um, so obviously during that, the days after that, the Air Force Base was the closest base there, Tinker Air Force Base. they were soliciting the volunteers to help with the cleanup and the recovery. So obviously, the active duty from the military entrance processing station became part of that too. So it was a significant, I guess, memory I've had while I was serving, just because strange coincidence happened was I actually had orders to the recruiting station that was in that building, but I was deployed to Corporate Gold at the time in Thailand. So I wasn't going to make it back from that deployment to fill that vacancy as soon as they needed it. So they swapped me and Sergeant Davis's orders. So Sergeant Davis went to the recruiting station and I went to the MAPS. Well, he didn't make it. So I had a lot of that survivor's guilt about it, because he did have two children. He had a wife, and it was just those things that, when it comes to orders and timing, how much of a difference it affects a person's life or could affect a person's life. Because I'm thinking, my kids, if I had orders there, my kids would have been in that daycare. There's just so many what ifs that came to it. So I've really held on to survivor's guilt for a while after that.
And so that was like you were about 5 or 6 years in.
Oh yeah. Yep. So
Wow.
that was in 95 when that happened.
Like in your mid-20s, early 20s.
Yes. Yep. I was about 24 at the time.
Supposed
And
to
I
have
just
a formative experience.
Yeah, it was very traumatic, especially when I'm thinking, wow, that was me. Then I was like, oh my gosh, that now this family is going through that because my orders were changed. So there was just so much that was to that. And I think it was before really there was that survivor's guilt that was labeled that way. But like I couldn't talk, I couldn't even talk to his wife afterwards. I mean, I just felt so guilty that he lost his life in that.
Right. I mean, I think you make a good point because at that time there wasn't the language didn't exist for people to kind of reach out, especially veterans, or it just even in traumatic situations, for people to have that kind of dialogue. It wasn't easy because there wasn't almost like a language and understanding pathway. Wow. And then not long after that, you were in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, so at that time, so when the tsunami hit through the Maldives area, that was 2005. And I was stationed in Okinawa, Japan at that time. So us being at the time, I was with Combat Logistics Force, and we got, pulled together and sent units over there to help in the aftermath of that. So we were spread out through the Maldives, throughout Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka was where the headquarters were for the task force that was managing that. So I stayed in Sri Lanka during the cleanup phase of that.
Wow, and that must have been a moving experience as well.
Oh yeah. But just when you think of the destruction that happens with Mother Nature, sometimes I know you think of the fires that are going on, the earthquakes, volcanoes. I mean, just the destruction that can happen and how it affects the people there. So that there, I really found my calling in the humanitarian work during that operation that we went out on.
Right, and that's what I actually find very interesting about your service arc is that because it sort of, it felt early, you just in reading about you, it felt like you've had this theme even before, almost as an attraction to join, to be part of something larger than yourself and to serve. And because of the time frame that you served, many of the younger veterans who I've worked with or spoken to in the past, their first sort of defining experiences were deployments to Iraq or Afghanistan, whereas before you even got to that, you had these two deployments that were, one, yes, was a terrorist act, but the other was just a natural disaster. But your humanitarian effort, I mean, it was an opportunity to serve so completely in that regard.
Oh
How did
yeah,
that,
and
how
I
did that
really think
change
those
you?
two events really helped formulate I think my leadership years in the Marine Corps. So I was a young sergeant during the Mira bombing, and then I was a staff sergeant getting ready to pick up gunny when I went to Sri Lanka. And then obviously my two deployments after that was one was to Iraq and the other one was to Afghanistan. Both of those I was first sergeant and sergeant major for those deployments. So I had a lot more responsibility on
Right.
deploying in the combat zone.
So when
Mhm.
when you deployed to Iraq, um, and so that was in deploying to Iraq in 2007. Can you just
Mhm.
describe uh, to me sort of how that, how that transpired in your life, and also going over, like, at that time, what was your MOS, so to speak, so people
Mhm.
understand what your focus was?
Okay. So as a first sergeant, when I went to Iraq, really it's still in my administrative side, but we handle a lot of the personnel. So I was really responsible for helping our ops chief really track the training, make sure everybody was qualified, making sure everybody was at the rifle range, making sure they got their equipment they needed. So that was all pre-deployment. And then obviously while we're out there in deployment, it was just managing the personnel while we were there. I was fortunate to have headquarters company, so I really got to see a lot on the operations side and work with our other companies that were out there because the corpsmen fell under my company. So I would be responsible for making sure all the corpsmen go out with our truck, say our truck company. So we had a truck company that did, oh my gosh, they drove some hours out there. Our truck drivers were just amazing, making sure those supplies were getting out to everybody. We had an engineering company out there. And we were also, I also had the casualty detachment. So that one there was really a hard one when I went to go visit the Marines that worked that section because they really took the casualties into the morgue is what it was, and a lot of them were really the Afghan people. So those ones I followed up with the gunny who led that detachment, even years afterwards, just because, me visiting just a few times there and saw what I saw, had an effect on me. And I can imagine that detachment. There was 6 Marines there that worked in that detachment and what they saw and had to deal with on the daily. So I really kept up with them to make sure, everything was good, if they needed any support, because they were all reservists. So they a lot of times they wouldn't have the resources that we do as active duty that just went back to a base. So I really followed those ones closely just because to me that was a traumatic job to have while we were in Afghan or Iraq.
Where were you in Iraq?
Fallujah.
Oh, you were in Fallujah. Okay.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah. So I was
and
on Camp Fallujah.
were you? I'm just curious, but were most of the Marines that you were overseeing and responsible for and following up on mostly male Marines? Were there some female Marines in there? Were there ever any women who had served as Lioness Marines in there?
Yeah. So being headquarters company, I had quite a few females that were in that. So we went out. I want to say at least 2, 3 times a week to the checkpoints. So we did the searches as people crossed through the checkpoints.
And did okay, so um, if you were doing the searches,
Mhm.
I mean, you were essentially functioning in the capacity of what people now call the Lioness duties.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
was there any special training
Oh,
for?
yes. Yes. So we had specialized training to be going out there at the security checkpoints. So we were trained on how to search, what to look for, obviously, the culture classes, learned a few language phrases. So they really prepared us to go out there to those checkpoints. And was sent out when we went there, we went out in teams of 4.
Went out in teams of 4.
Hmm.
Okay, because so you were actually not only a female engagement team member prior in Iraq, you served as a Marine Lioness.
Yes. Hmm.
That's
Yeah.
something.
It just wasn't called the Lioness program at the time. Yeah.
Right, right. And that's because, I mean, especially with the Lioness program, since it was the first one, it was just a very kind of ad hoc, I believe, it was something more over in theater than was really known about back home, I think, as well,
Yeah.
back then.
Mhm.
But that's so interesting. And were did most of those encounters were they more or less perfunctory, or did you sometimes I've had Marine Lionesses actually, and one Marine Lioness who served in Afghanistan in 2004, who just was called a searcher. um, you know,
Mhm.
they could get some intel and or also get some
Mhm.
information because, you know, she had said women, the mothers, they didn't want weapons on them or in their houses because they wanted to keep their children safe. Did you have any encounters like that?
It was not when we did the security checkpoint. So the experience I had in Iraq was totally different from Afghanistan. Because Afghanistan, we were patrolling, we were with the infantry units, we were going into compounds, and we had specific tasks, whether it was to gather intel, really to build trust with the community, especially that second half, or I always say the half of the population that our males couldn't reach. So there was a big difference between being the female engagement team, vice being the on the lioness or the search. Because really at the search one, we really didn't get that time to communicate with the Afghan population because all we were doing was searching them to make sure they could go through a checkpoint. But for the female engagement teams, we were engaged. We were assigned to infantry units. So if I send a team up to an infantry unit, there'd be 4 members that they're there, they're sleeping, they're eating, they're patrolling, they're part of that infantry unit. And
So
they did what they did.
so you went to Iraq, you did this, you got I'm sure you acquired some understanding of the Iraq culture
Hmm.
and so you took that, and I know that based on your own background, you have a specific you know, you bring a lot of understanding to the idea of different cultures working side by
Yes.
side. So
Hmm.
um which is
Especially when you think about the cultural sensitivity. I mean, I think I always want to mention that because a lot of people aren't as sensitive to other people's culture just because they don't understand. So I think I brought that aspect to the Afghan culture just because I'm aware, being Native American, and how different our culture is, that I was able to really focus in and identify those sensitive areas so we can engage easily with the population.
so then so you had I understand what you were doing now in your deployment to Iraq, and then in July of 2009 you deployed to Afghanistan with Combat Logistics Battalion 6.
Hmm.
Sounds like you had you know that was a very intense deployment because not only were you responsible for all the Marines and sailors at 5 different operating bases in your administrative capacity, but
Hmm.
you were also the leader of 20 female engagement team members. And so it was like having 2 jobs. Were they, can you just kind of talk me through at what point did you hear about the female engagement team idea and then find out that you were going to be in it, and did you have to train before you went
Mhm. Yeah, so we were identified before we went into country that we were going to be the female engagement team. So when we brought our battalion, which is we got quite a bit of females that were in our battalion. When we went out to 29 Palms to train, our focus was that. So we were training them to make sure they had the skills to be and lead a female engagement team. So we had 23 female engagement team members that were attached to the battalion, and 2 of them were corpsmen. So we did have 2 medical personnel that were going to go out with the engagement teams. So we trained in 29 Palms for that specific mission, in addition to the regular duties, because they're still going to do the regular duties, whether they're engineer, whether there were a truck driver, whether there were, like I said, a corpsman. So they still had to perform their functions. So they still trained with their work sections. However, we broke time away, so they're able to train on those tasks required for a female engagement team member. When we got into country, we also had specialized training for the female engagement team, and that was pretty much a hand down from those who were doing it from the brigade side of the house. So we spent I want to say it was like 2 weeks, if I recall. Time runs together sometimes. That we trained specifically in Afghanistan to be able to do what we had to do. And then from there, we got our taskings from the brigade on how many engagement team members they need attached to what units. So the ones that could detach from the units for a longer period of time, they went out to the infantry units. So they were patrolling with them, they were eating with them, they were part of the infantry units when they went out. And then we had just day ones. So if there was a day mission going on, then I could pull those ones that could to do it for that day. So it was really a scheduling thing, but it's something that I worked with the Brigade Operations Center, and then filled the female engagement teams through that source.
Wow. That where exactly were you in Afghanistan? What was your thought?
Yeah, so I was on Camp Leatherneck in Afghanistan, and then we had 5 FOBs. So being the headquarters company there, so we had we had the cooks, we had the corpsmen, we had the supply. So a lot of times if we had to go out and set up a new fob or base, then I'll send my people out to do that. I had cooks I sent out to all the forward fobs. So there's actually 5 forward observation bases that I had Marines at, or Navy or sailors at.
This was in Helmand Province.
Yes, Helmand Province.
Okay.
Yep. And then also within Helmand Province, our missions went out. So I usually went out on the day missions. So I'd go out on the day missions because obviously I couldn't go away to an infantry battalion. It'd be kind of weird having double sergeant major duties or first sergeant duties. But so I'd go do the day mission. So I did 11 missions while we were there, and one of them really sticks out to me. We were doing a medical cap. So we were actually setting up a medical tent where we're going to provide medical services for the neighboring compounds. So when we got there, there was nothing but males that were in line. There were no women and no children. And our focus was women and children. And it was to the point where a lot of the men walked for like the whole day before, spent the night there just so they could seek medical help. So what we ended up doing was we gathered up a security team. 4 of us went out along with our interpreter, and we patrolled compound to compound while we were there, just so we could find the women and children to see. I know I sent a picture of you. Of me. I don't know if you saw it, but it was me passing candy to a little Afghan girl.
Yes,
That picture, she was one of 25 kids, and there was 5 wives that lived in that little 2 room stone house. And outside they had, of course, multiple chickens and goats and stuff. But it just fascinated me that there was 25 children.
And you
And
said
when you
5 wives?
5 wives.
Okay, in one, and then
Yes, and 25 kids. So when you go in there and you meet them, obviously that's totally different from our culture. You can't have 5 wives. Obviously you could probably have 25 kids, but who wants 25 kids at one time?
right.
But there were like sisters. So when I was sitting down talking with them, that's what I felt like. I was like, oh my gosh, it feels like I'm just here talking with my sisters. Um,
Oh,
yeah. So how they were very engaging. I mean, I had a great interpreter, and all they asked, I get the same questions every time I went out to engage with a compound or a population. They want to know, one, am I married, and how many kids I got.
yeah,
That's always the first 2 questions they ask.
right.
Hmm.
And
And I think that's good because they make that connection.
well, I think that's actually, it's so interesting because that those are questions that start to humanize everybody for the other.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And then so we bonded over that. So I really, when I talk, let them know, hey, we can't have that many wives. My husband is just me. And
Yeah.
they couldn't believe that. They're like, oh my gosh, they're like too much time. And I was like, no. So they thought, we spent all the time together. They're like, oh no. So they love it that they get to share the time.
Well,
Yeah, it is.
they must have been fascinated to see um women in uniform. Can you tell me
Yes.
about that?
Yes. And a lot of times, we had to take off our helmets and stuff when we got inside just so they could see our hair and to make sure that, yes, we were women. Hmm.
And so, did you ever find out why? I mean, when you started out the story, you mentioned that you went out to set up the tent and your focus was on women and children, but all of there was a big line of men. And so
Hmm.
did you, I mean, did you have to treat the men and then go to find the women, or how did you
The
find out
females,
why?
yep. So all the females, we got up and, like I said, we got our security and we went and found the females. Now we still had medical personnel there that handled all the men, and there were all the male corpsmen or the doctor that they set up. But we took a female doctor with us, and we took 2 corpsmen with us to go out and search for that. But they just don't come out.
Right,
Yeah, if they don't have well, once again, it comes to a culture thing. So if
right.
they don't have a male family member taking them somewhere, they don't go.
I mean, on the one level,
Hmm.
that's kind of heartbreaking.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's one, oh my gosh, this one broke my heart. So we were at one compound, and there's a girl, beautiful girl. She had been about 12 years old because they said she was starting to cover her face because they said she's becoming of age. So she still wanted to play with the children, but she's kind of in that in between stage. Anyway, we put music on and we were going to dance with the children, have some fun. And her brother, which was 8 years old, told her she couldn't dance. So I was like, I had to ask my interpreter. I go, why can't she dance? And then she told me because when dad's gone, he's the man of the house. So if he says they can't do something, they can't do it. So she sat and watched. So I went to the boy and I was like, hey, everybody's having fun. The translator was translating. I was like, I go, I'd really like to dance with your sister. I go, me, you, and your sister could dance. And he let her dance. But it was just fascinating to me that he was 8 years old.
Right. And he'd been
Eight.
given all this power
Yes.
to
Yeah.
control it. Wow.
Hmm. Yeah. So there was just so many cultural differences that, I was amazed at. And they said a lot of times it's from 5 years old. They said you can have a 5-year-old running a household when dad's gone. Yeah. And I can imagine. I was like, my gosh, my 5-year-old's still learning to color with crayons. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
how could they leave decision making to that? But that's just how their culture is.
Well, also, I think when I hear those kinds of stories, although I've never heard this specific story before, but you
Hmm.
do realize there's not only like the cultural gap that exists in the moment that you're there, but
Mhm.
part of the you know, that those cultural norms uh haven't changed over a long time in some of those cultures. They're very
Oh,
old. So
yeah.
you realize it's almost like kind of going back in time a little bit because
Mhm.
obviously they don't have any contemporary resonance for us.
No.
And it
Yeah, and it was really hard to see, especially when when I saw that. I guess it didn't resonate me as hard as when I saw that that girl wanted to dance and her brother said no, so she didn't. And I was like, oh my gosh, ours would be so different. The girl, the oldest in our culture, would have been, no, I'm dancing.
right, they wouldn't say like a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old could say whatever they
Wouldn't
want,
say that.
but they would be like, well, I don't care what you're saying. I'm doing what I want. There
Hmm.
wouldn't be that kind of it is very interesting. But especially in a situation that you were in, you know, it was you were there having to, be very sensitive and respond so
Yeah.
clearly to all those cues. Um,
Hmm.
I just wanted to get back managing the women female engagement team members, those Marines who went
Hmm.
out for longer missions. Um, how was that? And were there times when they, returned and, were there some missions that they came back to you and was like, wow, this was really hard because of
Hmm.
that stood out? And what kind of stories did they bring out to you? I was wondering if you could give us a range.
Hmm. Yeah. So one I remember specifically because I just can't believe it happens. So we had a unit that we attached 5 female engagement team members to, and they separated them. So they segregated them. They put them in their own tent. They brought the food to them.
The Marines did?
Mhm.
Infantry
Yep.
that they were attached to.
Mhm. Yeah, so I was like, "What in the world? Why, why is this happening the way it is?" Well, anyway, they said, "And we couldn't wear our frog gear." So our frog gear is another type of gear that they had us wear outside the wire, which on, well, both women and men it is form fitting. And it's almost like a t-shirt material that's flame resistant. So on a woman, it looked, I mean, you could see a woman's figure, most
Right.
definitely, but nothing revealing. Well, the commander or the commanding officer of that unit didn't want the females walking around because of that uniform. And I was like, yes, I was like, this is a uniform one that were issued, and there's nothing else they could wear because this is what the requirement is for them to wear this. So it just, uh, I guess it bothered me so much. I had to go to the general on this one. Me, my captain, presented it to the brigade on that. That they kept them secluded, and the only time they came out of their tent was when they went out on patrol because of that the frog suit that they were wearing.
I'm sorry, but given what we were
Mhm.
just talking about,
Mhm.
you see some
We
connection.
haven't changed much.
Maybe I
Mhm.
spoke too soon.
Yeah, yeah. But it's like little things like that, and it's not the whole unit.
Right.
It was just that one guy who had the power to do that on that one base did that.
Who
And
he was kind of going against what the top down uh, way to do things was. He was saying, but down he just there was no one
he
there.
didn't like the females in that uniform. He didn't want
He didn't
um
want them there, did he?
yeah, yeah. I'm thinking he didn't want him there. I think he was just using it as a reason to do that. But to me, so it became an issue, where we had to say, hey, you either treat them equally or you're not getting them. And so in turn, that will hinder their mission and getting their intel or whatever, their mission was at that time. Um,
And as you said, they were there, you were there, especially with the female engagement team members,
mhm.
to be in touch with half the population.
hmm A very important half, because this half talks. This half felt the connection with us to give us details that they would not have gotten anywhere else.
Wow. And
hmm
how demoralizing for those young women.
Oh, very, very. Because a lot of them were seniors. So the senior one I sent up there was a staff sergeant that was with them. So I had a staff sergeant, so one staff sergeant, two sergeants, and a corporal was what when went up there to that infantry unit. hmm And to have that happen to them.
Now, were there any missions that, given that they were your FET teams were assigned to attached to infantry divisions, were did any of them find themselves engaged in
Oh yeah, yeah. Quite a few of them received Purple Hearts and combat action ribbons.
wow.
Yeah, yeah. But there was no life lost. I didn't lose any female engagement teams, but they came back with combat action ribbons and a couple of them with Purple Hearts.
And was there, I mean, and I've asked this a lot of like other the women who served as cultural support team members, and even some of the Lioness and some of the other Marine female engagement teams and Marine Lionesses said they were able to gather information,
Mm-hmm.
as in intelligence information. One gave the example of a woman who just said, "You want to know where all the weapons are? They're over there behind that building." Telling them because she doesn't want fighting. She doesn't want
Mm-hmm.
her kids to get killed. She doesn't want her husband to get injured or killed.
Mm-hmm.
Did that
Yes.
happen?
Oh yes, yes. One particular one I remember is the husband was going to Pakistan. So he's going to Pakistan a lot, to the point where whenever we went to that compound, he was gone. And that's who, we kind of wanted to engage with. So finally we sat down, because they're like, you guys got to find out where he's been. Where is he going? So I sat down with his wife. We were wives, I should say wives. And we were talking, and they're like, oh no, he's in Pakistan. So we're like, well, what's he doing in Pakistan? That's an odd place for him to be right now. Oh yeah, they're like, oh, he's on business, and blah 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 blah, talking away. So we went back and reported it back, and come to find out he was smuggling for the Taliban.
Oh wow. Okay.
hmm
So
Yeah.
so I think it's, I'm sort of asking what is already apparent, but I just want to find it out in terms of your experience. Um, the work that you did as a female engagement team leader and the female engagement team soldiers under you, Marines under you, made a difference.
Oh, most definitely. I think that the female engagement teams is what paved the way for us to have open every MOS for us Marines. Most definitely. Most definitely. So when I did it was 2009 through 2000 or 2010. And here, like you said, 2013, they opened up. And a few years later after that, the Marines opened up all MOSs to females. So I think most definitely the female engagement teams had a huge impact on that, because they were able to know we were trainable. We were able to be counted on missions. We completed tasks as required, and we didn't hinder the infantry unit's mission or their capabilities at all. So most definitely, I think the female engagement team really, really impacted the way forward for the Marines that are serving now.
So I really, I hear that. I think that's a really important point because I feel like what you're saying is like it became obvious to everyone
hmm
what the female team engagement teams were doing, like made a difference to the mission. Like it made them, to the situation, and that these women were contributing and it was these women who were contributing, and that was significant, and that kind of like, you know, was a learning moment for everyone, especially a lot of the men who were like, "Oh, what
Yes.
are these women with us for?"
Hmm. And I think really that's why I love the integrated training for us now, is because now they are starting out together. So when they first get down to basic training, they already see a female. They're training with her. They can see that she's able to do it. Vice after all the training's done, and then the first time they see females when they check into the unit. Back then, they don't know that we went through the same struggles that they did. So I think now having that integrated training really helps build that bond between the male and the females that are serving together.
So one last question I want to ask you about the female engagement teams and your deployment with them in Helmand Province. Because I've talked to others who've said that, especially for those who went out on maybe longer outside, to further distances for X number of days at a time, that a number of times they would have to be called back because someone got concerned about, the combat exclusion policy, or you could only be gone for so long before the women would have to come back. Maybe the infantry that they were with didn't have to come back, but they would have to come back and spend one night on a base, and then they could go out again to kind of like make sure DOD or the people who were concerned about the policy, that the policy wasn't being violated. Did you have any of that?
No, not at all. When they requested the female engagement team, is for a specific period. So if they had a specific operation going and they needed them for 2 weeks, that's what that was. So at the end of that 2 weeks, that come back. So they might come back and then they might say, "Oh no, we need them again." Then they do another request and we can send them back out there. But it had nothing. Well, what I could say is they requested them for whatever time period they needed them for whatever operation. They'd go out there and do that, and then they could come back. So they're only there for those certain things. So if there's downtime, I don't want to say there's downtime out there because I don't want it to come out like that. But if they didn't need them for a specific operation, they came back.
Now, and all these women, including yourself, all have all their jobs. In other words,
Yes.
they would be sort of assigned to the female engagement teams, but their traditional MOS, or their, such as, and the same with you, was also in another capacity. They could have been mechanics or
Exactly.
whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I do know after we were done with ours, so when the MEF came over, because remember it was still early, so we only had the brigade out there. It was still early. So when the MEF rolled in, they had dedicated female engagement team members at that point, where that's what they did.
That's what they went over, right?
Yeah.
No, and I've heard that, and I guess there's so many different parameters sort of surrounding everyone's experience because it was all changing so fast.
Yeah. So it was an evolution process. So when we're out there as a brigade, we were much smaller than bringing out a whole MEF. So with the whole MEF, they identified who they wanted on those female engagement teams because we showed that it was successful. It was working.
Right.
Yeah. So it became a permanent position for units going out there.
So I have to ask this one question. So did you have some moments of, shall I say, satisfaction when you moved back, because you were also at the headquarters, and when you, at brigade headquarters, when you would see for some of the other say male Marines there who came to understand, wow, look at what the FET teams are doing. This is important.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think at the moment, a lot of people didn't see it until after the fact, because everybody was just so in the moment on what's going on and what your responsibilities are. I think at the top level, we saw the difference, but I think on the bottom one, they were just doing their daily to survive and get their mission done. Where I think now Yeah. So now when somebody looks back on it, they're like, oh my gosh, I saw them in action. I patrolled with them. Yes, they did do that. They can do that. So I think it's more hindsight on that
Right.
one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, everyone lessons learned to come sort of after the fact. As
Yeah.
after you have to get some perspective. I know I
Mm-hmm.
understand that. I understand that. So, I mean, thank you for for walking and talking me through all of your different experiences. And I want to get probably more than any other veteran that I've interviewed. I want to take time to talk about your post your work as a veteran in the community after your
Mm-hmm.
retirement. So I just, as I mentioned, you had retired in 2016, and
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and and again, you seem to have a certain feeling for what you wanted to do. And can
Mhm.
you talk us through how you kind of got to your position as president of the United Way for Onslow County?
Oh, most definitely. So my last duty station, I was Sergeant Major of Wounded Warrior Battalion. When I was at Wounded Warrior Battalion, I really got to see what nonprofits and faith-based organizations did for our wounded warriors. And I decided then that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go out and work in a community, but help those that need the help. So I retired early. I get harassed all the time with like, oh my gosh, you can do just one more enlistment. Well, I was like, well, I guess I could have, but I had a calling. I
Yeah.
really wanted to go into nonprofit, and that was an opportune time for me because I'm already dealing with all the nonprofits at Wounded Warrior Battalion. So I put in my retirement papers. I'm retired early. Had a lot of offers from nonprofits because everybody knew that's what I was going to do. And so I went with Hope for the Warriors. So Hope for the Warriors, I spent 2 years with them, really, helping wounded service members in that capacity. But I really wanted to focus on smaller scale because Hope for the Warriors was national, but I wanted to focus on small scale because I got to be able to see the fruits of my labor. So I went ahead and took the position at United Way here in Onslow County, and I get to help the community on so many levels. So I definitely found my calling. I'm glad with the decision I made. I'm still right outside the base. So I do a lot of stuff with the veterans. I just recently started the Onslow Veterans Powwow right here in the community because a lot of people don't know as Native Americans, we really sacrifice our culture. Although veterans sacrifice a whole lot of stuff, veterans, um, especially Native Americans, being a male, a lot of them have to cut their hair when they come in, which is sacred to them. A lot of times we're stationed at duty stations. We can't put on our regalia and go dance somewhere because there's nothing there. We can't go outside a base and get fry bread if we want it because no one sells it. So we really sacrifice a lot. So, and if you're not able to get home during a ceremony, whether duty commitments, deployments, funding, you name it, then you went without. I made it home, I could tell you 4 times in my 26 and a half years, I made it home for a ceremony. And to me, I just don't think that that's right at all. A person serving their country, and we do so many sacrifices as it is, your culture shouldn't be one of them. So I established the Onslow Veterans Powwow right outside of Camp Lejeune. It provides the Native Americans that are serving an opportunity to participate in their culture through various ceremonies that I set up throughout that weekend. But also honor all the veterans. We got a huge veterans population here, so we really honor them, non-Native veterans alike, along with the Native American veterans, honor them through Native American culture. So I just went over my 3rd year having that, and this past weekend, it's always the first weekend in November, we had over 7,000 spectators and probably close to 300 veterans in the circle. that were getting recognized. It was absolutely beautiful. And and that's what I want to do. I want to make sure veterans are recognized. I want to make sure they're taken care of. So those are like my efforts I do now.
Wow, that's amazing. So, because what you're saying is that the powwow, which you this is in Onslow County, the powwow,
Yes.
and so
Yes, ma'am.
you're chairman of that getting
Yes.
make sure this happens every year,
Every
and
year.
and not and obviously its primary focus is to bring in the indigenous Americans who have served, but
Mhm.
also you welcome non-indigenous Americans
Oh, yes,
to
yep, and
participate?
one thing I make sure is that it's free, so it's open to the public. Anybody could come, and I make sure it's free through sponsorships because I know, as a young girl, if something was going on and, if you have whatever, 6 sisters and it costs even $5 to get in, that's $30 the family didn't have. So I don't think me and the committee agree that someone's economic status should not prevent them from experiencing Native American culture. So we get sponsorships from communities that want to support veterans, and then it's a free event for the community. Hmm.
That sounds amazing. And I just wanted to ask you, um, because it seems, because when you say that you know your culture should be available to you, but I'm also thinking that in for the Native American culture, so often those cultural events are already deeply connected with a spiritual aspect,
Hmm.
maybe more so. Not that it doesn't happen in other cultures, but that does seem to be very kind of a core principle in Native American culture.
Hmm. Yes, yes, very correct. So even at the powwow, I'll hold in a nipi, which is like the sweat lodge. So our native members, or even, we get people that sign up that just want to experience that spirituality of Native American culture. So they would be able to experience that at the powwow. So I do bring in different um venues into the powwow. So we have our traditional powwow where it'll show like different dances from different cultures. We got all the tribes representative. I bring a teepee in, let them experience going in a teepee. So really give them that full Native American experience. It's just because I just think it's so important.
Wow,
Hmm.
that's so amazing. And I mean, you've done so much in service uh, to the country, and then you've done so much in service now, and I think you're continuing to do to your community and to for Indigenous Americans. And what do you see for yourself? What more do you want to do?
Um, right now, I think I want to take a break. No, I'm a new grandma, so my grandbaby's 1 year old. So I think I want to try to spend a little bit more time with her. So I'm probably going to step away from a few of my hats that I'm wearing, and but if there's something that comes up that's a new initiative and they need someone to help lead or assist, then by all means I'm going to sign up for it if it's something that really speaks to me.
Wow. Well, I I just, I mean, I'm just so in awe of your life and your accomplishments and everything that have done and continuing to do, and also just sort of what has shined through in speaking with you is the idea of service, and I think
Mhm.
that that's often a component, and I don't want to be glib and say that's every experience in the military, but it is an experience that does occur, and it's just there embedded, so organic to your life. And I think you brought that sense of service to your work, and it runs as a theme. And I think it's just exceptional. So I just want to say what an honor it was to speak with you, and thank you for your service. And I can't even imagine how it must mean so much to the people in your area that you have created the powwow, and that it's open to Native Americans and others who would just want to open up and experience what you have. Because that the sensitivity between cultures just doesn't happen. When you're in this country, sensitivities to other cultures just doesn't happen when you go outside of our borders. It happens every day when you're within them. And the more we're aware of that, I think the better. And you're a wonderful example of that.
Thank you so much. I love being on your show and getting the word out to everybody, and really educating people on the female engagement teams, just because I think they're going to go down in history as being a game changer for the females.
Absolutely.